The air was heavy with fear that night. The kind of fear you could feel crawling up your skin, prickling your neck, and making you glance over your shoulder even when you knew nothing was there. Someone whispered behind me, "She's back." I froze. She came back. We were standing in the village square, gathered around the bonfire, when we saw her. Adisa. She was barefoot, her white wrapper stained with mud and something darker. Her hair hung in wet clumps around her face, and her eyes, oh, those eyes, were wide, empty, and haunted. She looked like someone who had seen the other side and returned, but not entirely. Adisa. Old Oma, the herbalist, whispered. "Is it really you?" Adisa didn't answer. She just stood there, trembling, staring at the ground like she didn't even hear us. Someone touched my arm. It was Kwame, my older brother. He was clutching his lantern so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "Don't get close," he hissed. She crossed the river. That statement sent a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. Everyone knew what that meant. You didn't cross the river after dark, not unless you wanted to bring back something with you. The priestess stepped forward then, her white robe glowing in the firelight. She was a tall, imposing woman, with patterns of white clay painted across her face and arms. Her staff, adorned with beads and cowrie shells, struck the ground with authority as she approached Adisa. The crowd fell silent. "Adisa," the priestess said, her voice low and firm. "What have you done?" Adisa's lips trembled, but no words came out. She sank to her knees, clutching her chest, gasping like the air around her was too thin to breathe. Finally, she choked out, "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to." "Mean to what?" the priestess demanded. Her eyes narrowed as she leaned closer. "Speak, child. What did you bring back with you?" Adisa's head snapped up then, and for the first time, she looked directly at us. "It wasn't my fault," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "They took him. They took Kwaku." The mention of Kwaku's name made the villagers gasp. Everyone knew about Adisa and Kwaku, the blacksmith's son. They were inseparable, despite Old Kofi's insistence that Adisa was promised to him. Old Kofi was the chief's son, a man of wealth and power, but also a man twice Adisa's age. When Adisa refused him, he had taken it as an insult, a blow to his pride. He had sworn she would regret it. The priestess's face darkened. "You went to the river for him, didn't you?" she said. It wasn't a question. Adisa nodded weakly. "He called me," she whispered. "I heard his voice in the night. He said he was waiting for me by the pool. He said he needed me." The crowd shifted uneasily. Everyone knew the stories about the pool, how it was said to be cursed, how spirits lingered there, waiting to lure the unsuspecting into their world. "What happened when you got there?" the priestess asked. Adisa shook her head, her body racked with sobs. "I don't know," she cried. "I saw him, but he wasn't him. His eyes, they were wrong. He reached for me, and I ran. I ran as fast as I could. But... She clutched her arms, her nails digging into her skin. "I felt something following me. I could hear it breathing. It whispered my name." The priestess straightened, her expression grim. She turned to the villagers. "Fetch my herbs and the offering bowl," she commanded. "We must cleanse her before whatever followed her crosses into our world." As the villagers scrambled to obey, I couldn't tear my eyes away from Adisa. She sat there, trembling, muttering to herself. "He's still there," she whispered. "He's still waiting for me." That night, the priestess performed the ritual. She burned herbs that filled the air with thick, acrid smoke. She painted symbols on Adisa's skin and chanted words in a language I didn't understand. The villagers watched from a distance, their faces pale with fear. But it didn't work. At midnight, we heard it. A voice, low and echoing, coming from the direction of the river. "Adisa," it called. "Come back to me." Adisa screamed. "It's him," she cried, trying to run toward the sound, but the priestess grabbed her, holding her back. "It's not him," she shouted. "It's the river spirits. They are trying to take you." The villagers began to panic. Some ran back to their huts, locking their doors and windows. Others stayed, clutching their charms and muttering prayers. The priestess, however, remained calm. She handed her staff to Kwame and picked up a clay bowl filled with a dark, thick liquid. "We must go to the pool," she said. "If we don't end this now, the whole village will suffer." The path to the pool was dark and treacherous. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the only light came from our lanterns. The priestess led the way, with Adisa beside her, still trembling but determined. The rest of us followed, too scared to stay behind but too terrified to get too close. When we reached the pool, the air was freezing. The water shimmered unnaturally, glowing faintly in the darkness. And there, standing at the edge, was Kwaku. Or what looked like him. His skin was pale and damp, his clothes dripping with water. His eyes glowed faintly, and his lips twisted into a smile that didn't reach them. "Adisa," he said, his voice echoing. "You came back." Adisa took a step forward, but the priestess stopped her. "That's not him," she said firmly. "It's a spirit wearing his face." Kwaku tilted his head, his smile fading. "You left me," he said, his voice growing louder. "You left me to die." Adisa sobbed. "I didn't mean to," she cried. "I tried to save you, but I couldn't." The spirit let out a terrible laugh, a sound that made my blood run cold. "Then come with me now," it said, extending a hand. "We can be together again." Before Adisa could move, the priestess stepped forward. She threw the liquid from the bowl onto the spirit, and it let out a scream that echoed through the forest. The glow around it flickered, and its form began to waver. "Go back to the river," the priestess commanded. "You have no power here." The spirit snarled, but it began to retreat, its form dissolving into the mist. Finally, with one last scream, it disappeared into the pool, and the water stilled. We returned to the village in silence. Adisa was alive, but she was never the same. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was always about Kwaku. She said she could still hear his voice in her dreams, calling to her from the river. The priestess warned us to stay away from the pool, to never cross the river after dark. And we listened. Because some loves, we learned, are best left in the past.